everybody. Good morning and welcome to Lake Oconee Church. If we haven't met yet, my name is Andy. I'm on staff here, and if you're our guest, I am so glad that you've chosen to be a part of our service today, that you came in just to see what it might be like to be a part of our service. And because of that, we've put together a gift I would love for you to take with you as you go. And that gift is located in the studio, which is the glass room you pass just on your way in. So after the service, make sure to swing by, pick up that gift quickly as you head out the door, just as a small way that we can say thank you for being a part of this morning's service. And if you're our guest online, you can go to guest.lakeoconee.church and we'll email you something special as well. But thank you for being a part of the service today. Well, I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's happening in the news and some of what's going on, but apparently the Summer Olympics are just around the corner. And if you think about some of the amazing athletes that make up the Olympic teams that compete, they're just extraordinary. I mean, take the gymnasts, for instance. Just the extraordinary balance that they have to have as they compete. And I sort of started thinking, well, wait a second, I wonder if there's just any ordinary people that might be able to compete at that same level. And so we started looking at a few surveillance photos, and here's what we came up with. We found this group. There's some extraordinary balance there, but I'm not sure that's gonna end well. Then we found this lady. Great flexibility, but the balance seems to be missing just a little bit. And then we found this extraordinary family. Beautiful family photo that has apparently started to go wrong. But if they can recover and stick the landing, this might be a potential Olympic contestant. I'm not sure. Balance is difficult for all of us, really. And a lot of us, over the course of our lives, we've gotten knocked off balance by some mean people that we've encountered. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that today as we start a brand new series entitled Mean People. And I think that you'll find the content to be very, very encouraging as we get there. But first, we're going to sing three songs together with James David Carter, Amy Karstedt, and our band. And then we're going to hear this morning's message, and then we're going to tag on the morning an extra 15-minute event called Next. And we're going to end a little bit early so that you can be a part of this, but Next is perfectly designed for those who are newer to Lake Oconee Church. And during that 15-minute event, you can stay right where you are. We'll continue to watch your kids, and I'll be hosting that event. I would love to meet you. And you'll be able to find out a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes, a little bit about what opportunities are available for your family that you may not know about, and you'll get to ask some of your questions. So I hope that you'll plan right now to stick around for a few minutes after this morning's service for that 15-minute event. Well, I think that's everything you need to know. So if you would, stand to your feet, try to keep your balance, wave to somebody near you, and we'll keep this thing going.
Well, good morning, everybody. So glad you chose to be here with us. We're going to sing 3 songs together, respond to God together, bless the name of Jesus together. Love for you to join in. Here we go. Let praise be a weapon that silences the enemy. Let praise be a weapon that conquers all anxiety. Let it rise. Let praise arise. We sing your name in the dark and it changes everything. We sing with all we are and we claim your victory. Let it rise. Let praise arise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lifted high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Whoa, we praise you. Whoa. faith be the song that calms a storm inside of me. Let it rise. Let faith arise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lifted high. With all creation crying, God, we praise you. Whoa. We praise you. Singing, this is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lifted high. With all creation crying, God, we praise you. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lifted high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Whoa, sing, we praise you. Sing it. We praise you. We're going to keep singing this morning. Love this reminder of the faithfulness of God. It goes like this: promise maker, promise maker, promise keeper. You finish what you began. In our provision through the desert, you see it through till the end. And you see it through till the end. The Lord our God is ever faithful, never changing through the ages. From this darkness, you will lead us, and forever we will say, you're the Lord our God. And in the silence, and in the waiting, still we can know you are good. And all your plans are for your glory. Yes, we can know you are good. Yes, we can know you are good. Oh, the Lord our God is ever respond. So we won't move without you. No, we won't move without you. You're the light of all and all that we need. We won't move without you. No, we won't move without you. You're the light of all and all that we need. Yes, you are. We won't move without you. We won't move without you. You're the light of all and all that we need. Oh, we believe it. We won't move without you. We won't move without you. You're the light of all and all that we need. Yeah. The Lord our God is ever faithful, never changing through the ages. And from this darkness, you will lead us. And forever we will say, you're the Lord our God. And forever we will say, you're the Lord our God. And forever we will say, you're the Lord our God. Oh, you're the Lord our
Sing this with us. How great the chasm that lay between us. How high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I clung to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Come on, sing it with us. Oh, hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Oh, hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's declared the grave has no claim on me. Come on. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe, and out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Oh, Jesus, yours is the victory. Yes. Oh, hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Oh, hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ. Come on, my living hope. Oh, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Oh, God, you are my living hope. We are so grateful to sing these songs with you today, and we invite you to grab a seat.
You know, a couple of weeks ago, several weeks ago now, we celebrated Easter. And the point of celebrating Easter was we were celebrating a living hope in Jesus Christ. And that's not just this one-time event that we kind of hit, you know, kind of once a year or as a special occasion. But that really, truly is our heartbeat, that we are celebrating a living hope that intersects with the messiness that is a lot of our lives. And as a church, we exist because we believe so strongly in that living hope that we want to introduce that living hope to as many people as will consider it. And we've designed our services and everything that happens through our church to be a place where people can investigate that living hope, regardless of whether they fully believe, but they can begin to investigate and find out, what does it really mean to have a living hope in the middle of my life and in the middle of your life? And if you came this morning and that's what you're investigating, I'm so glad that you're here. Even if you can't sing that song with full confidence, even if you've got some questions, this is a place to begin that investigation and to grow in that investigation. And that's what people are doing alongside you, and I'm glad that you've chosen to be a part of it. And we talked a little bit earlier about balance and how it's difficult in a sport, but it's difficult in life as well. And for a lot of us, we try to maintain our balance, especially when it comes to our time. And because of that, we kind of get very protective of our time. And we tend not to lean into some really amazing opportunities. And volunteering in helping others know about that living hope is an extraordinary opportunity. And though it seems like a commitment of time, it's actually so rewarding to get into a spot that fits how you're wired and how you're built as you make a difference, highlighting something as important as hope for somebody else. So if you have any interest in exploring what it might look like to volunteer here at our church, swing by the studio before you leave today and just let them know, hey, I'm curious and I'd love some more information, and they'll make sure that you get that over the next week. And for those of you who give towards our mission here, whether you use the buckets that are beside each of our exit doors, or whether you go on your phone and visit give.lakeoconee.church, however you choose to do that, thank you so much for investing in our mission so that others know about the living hope that we just sang about. Well, here in a minute, we're going to connect with this morning's message. And if you've been around here a while, you know that sometimes we have a presenter who's live on our stage, and at times we have a presenter that's from a nearby campus. And this morning we're going to be hearing from Andy Stanley as he jumpstarts this brand new series entitled Mean People. And I think you'll find it to be extraordinarily helpful. But before we get there, I'd like to take a minute to pray for us. Dear God, thank you that you bring hope into our lives. Because right now, there's people sitting in the room that I know are grappling with all sorts of things. God, for some of us, it's our health. For some of us, it's things that aren't playing out well in our business. For others of us, it's our relationships. It is that person on the other side of us that's right now coming across as a very mean person in the way that they're handling themselves. And we're tempted to behave that same way back. God, there's things going on that we wouldn't wish on our worst enemies, and yet they are our day-to-day. God, in the middle of that, please remind us that the resurrection of Jesus that we celebrate at Easter is more than a cool event, but it truly brings our hope in the middle of our difficulty. And God, today as we hear from Andy what it means and what it can mean and what it could mean as we interact with people in our lives that are way worse than just not nice. God, I pray that you would help us to understand you differently, to think differently about our responses, and even to behave differently because of what we hear today. I pray these things in the greatest demonstration of love, kindness, and hope. In the name of Jesus. Amen.
So today is part one of a two-part series entitled Mean People and What to Do About Them. Mean People and What to Do About Them. I thought about entitling this series Bad People and What to Do About Them, but we hesitate to call anybody bad. We say things like this, like, he's really not a bad person, isn't this what we say? He's really not a bad person. He just does bad things, like a lot, which I think that's what it means to be a bad person. But so we're not going to do bad person. We're going to do mean person. We're going to stick with mean people, and specifically, what should we do about the mean people in our lives? And by mean, I mean mean. These are the unpleasant people. These are the deceptive people. These are the people that control us with time or money or with our children. These are the users. They're just unkind. It may be that person that when you see them coming, you just don't want to interact with them because, well, there's just no other way to say it. They're just mean. And to be clear, this isn't to say that we're not often mean. I mean, all of us have been mean at some point. In fact, there's somebody maybe who's going to see or hear this message, and unfortunately, we're going to come to mind. But generally, what we talk about when we're together is how to live a life in such a way and to live our lives in such a way that we're not the mean people. So we're not discounting the fact that from time to time we can be mean and certainly have the potential to be perhaps as mean as the meanest person we've ever met. But these two messages are going to focus on how to respond to and how to react to the mean people in our lives. Now, the reason this is so important is if you don't have a plan, and if I don't have a plan, if we're not prepared, and honestly, as we're going to see, if we're not somewhat proactive, here's what happens, and we've all experienced this. The mean people in our lives, ultimately, they gain a measure of control over our lives. And before we know it, we're actually acting like they do. And it feels in the moment as if we have no choice. In fact, if somebody were to hear your story, or when you tell your story and you talk about how you've reacted to or responded to the person that, is mean to you, the person that hears your story is like, well, who could blame you? It's almost like you have no choice. And the reason it feels like we have no choice is this, that mean people, and we don't think in these terms when we're in the relationship, but mean people, without even meaning to, they just keep us off balance. We're just always off balance. We don't know what we're walking into. We don't know how to respond. They kind of lean left and we kind of lean right, because when we're off balance, what happens? We're forced to compensate. This is why in these relationships, you feel like you're not even yourself. In fact, somebody may have said to you, when you're around him, when you're around her, when you're together, I feel like you're not even yourself. Why? Because, when we're around these kinds of people, we are forced to compensate. If somebody walks up and pushes you off balance, everything in you, you compensate to regain your balance. But the problem with a mean person is it is virtually impossible to maintain and keep your balance. I'll give you a quick illustration that actually is a long illustration I'm going to try to keep short. When my mom, who died when she was 82, when my mom was in her late 30s, she met a young woman in her late 20s that she helped out, and they became lifelong friends. Her name was Alice, and Alice actually used to stay with me, with my sister and me, when my parents would go out of town. So I've known Alice basically my whole life. So then when my mom was in her 70s, and basically she couldn't drive anymore, and she really needed some help at home, Alice would actually drive 45 minutes from her home. Now, Alice is in her late 60s. She would drive from her home 45 minutes to my mom's home every single week to go through my mom's mail, pay my mom's bills, balance my mom's checkbook, and just answer any questions and just spend time with my mom, which I was so grateful for. So my mom invested in her. Now she's investing in my mom. And again, it took so much pressure off of me, so extraordinarily grateful. So as my mom, near the end of her life, and as she was, less and less able to take care of herself, Alice began to lose her sight. And before long, she couldn't drive any longer, and she was basically a shut-in in her own home. And then Sandra, my wife, began doing for Alice what Alice had done for my mom. She would drive over every single week, go through the mail, pay the bills, balance the checkbook, and just answer any questions that she had. And so she was kind of giving back based on what, Alice had so graciously done for my mom. So as time goes by, it becomes clear to us that Alice can't stay in her house any longer, because technically she was living alone. We'll come back to that in just a minute. And so Sandra convinced Alice that she needed to move to assisted living. Now, if anyone here has ever moved a parent or a spouse's parent to assisted living, it is so complicated. But it's even more complicated when we're trying to move somebody who is not a family member. So Sandra got an attorney. She became Alice's official legal power of attorney. And then she got another friend of Alice's to become Alice's physical or medical power of attorney. So there's kind of Team Alice. But because Alice had never married, she had no kids, she'd pretty much outlived almost all of her friends, and certainly her parents and her brother and sister. And so she's alone in the world, and so, we're going to take care of Alice. So about 9 months before the process began to get her into assisted living. So the goal was get her in assisted living. In fact, Sandra found a place 2 miles from our house, because we're committed to Alice for the rest of her life. She found this place, and Alice could almost afford it based with her pension and with her Social Security, but there was going to be a gap. So the goal is get her out, clean out her house, sell her stuff, sell the house. She had a little bit of equity, put the money in the bank, and, we'll just go from there. So that's the plan. Very complicated, especially when you're not related to the person. Well, anyway, about 8 or 9 months before that process began, an old friend of Alice's showed up at her front door, a gentleman in his late 60s, keeping all that straight, and he said, Alice, I'm destitute. I don't have a place to live. I've been living in my car. It's getting cold. Would it be okay if I moved in with you for just a few months? Now, Alice had been warned, and later we were warned, that this guy's name is Roger, that if you let Roger move in, you're going to have a difficult time getting Roger to move out. She had been told that, and she'd known him for a while, and somebody told us that when we heard about Roger moving in, but she allowed him to move into one of her spare bedrooms, and actually, honestly, he was pretty helpful, because he could drive, and he could take her to her doctor's visits. He would bring us the mail sometimes. He seemed like the nicest guy, and I couldn't imagine this was going to be a problem. Besides, he knew we're going to sell her house, and so if we sell her house, you'll probably have to move out by that point, right? So I felt like there was kind of a built-in deadline. This wouldn't be a problem. So sure enough, he was pretty helpful. Sandra did, I should say, I wouldn't say estate sale. It was more garage sale than estate sale, if you know what I mean. There wasn't a whole lot to sell, but we had an estate sale or a garage sale. Roger was actually helpful. He actually even bought some of her stuff to put in his storage unit that he said he had, which was great. Now, he wasn't paying any rent, wasn't paying any bills, wasn't buying any groceries. There was no cash outlay. He was living for free for all these months. And so we finally get Alice moved to this assisted living place close to us. That was, an event. We get the house cleaned out. We do this big garage sale. Sandra put signs out that the house is going to go up for sale. And, the real estate market right now is so hot. So she starts getting calls. So now she's got to show the house, but now the house is completely empty. She sold everything and then threw everything else away. Just a mammoth, task if you've ever done that for someone. And so Sandra is, riding point on this whole process. And then we got to show the house. But the problem is there's, come see this house. It's completely empty except, oh yeah, don't go in that bedroom. There's an air mattress with some clothes in the closet and a computer on the floor. Don't mind the guy camping out in the house. So, it's going to be kind of hard to show this house, right? Well, so she starts showing the house. And so we're like, Roger, okay, thank you. You got to go. And he just ignores us. So Sandra gives him a deadline. He gives him 3 weeks by this date. He agreed that, hey, on that Monday, I'll be gone. Monday comes, Monday goes. He's still there. And it becomes apparent he's not moving out. In fact, because, Alice is not living, because Alice isn't living in the house right now, Sandra shut off all the, unnecessary utilities, including the television service. And she gets a bill from the television provider. She calls and says, no, I canceled that. And the person on the other end of the line said, well, somebody called and had it turned back on. And Roger had called the television provider and had the television service turned back on. And Sandra left the internet on because he said he needed internet. So this begins to escalate and escalate and escalate. So one night, it's all we're thinking about and talking about. Every day I come home, I'm like, have you heard from Roger? Have you talked to Roger? Has Roger moved out? And we've got all these other people that are like, we got to get Roger out, but it's kind of resting on us. So we're sitting on the couch late one afternoon. Sandra calls Roger. I said, put it on, on speakerphone. And of course, I'm trying not to get involved because Sandra throughout the process has said, Andy, you cannot get involved because I wanted to get involved. And I only had one tool, I want to use my tool. And she's like, you can't use your tool. So they have this conversation, speakerphone. And he is so rude to Sandra. I've never heard anyone speak to my wife this way. I was so angry. And she's kind of leaning this way, and I'm reaching for the phone. I just want to take the phone and say, and she's like, no. And he's saying, I'm going to sue you. You can't kick me out. The law doesn't allow you to kick out a renter. I'm like, renter? That assumes rent? This guy's paid nothing. He's taken advantage of an 80-year-old woman. We're trying to close her house so we can put money in the bank because there's a monthly gap between her pension and Social Security to stay in this assisted living place. And he is so rude to Sandra. Okay, this is how bad it gets. So we get a contract on the house. It's full price offer plus no contingencies. It's perfect. It's more money than we thought we could get for Alice's house. And she so desperately needs this money. And so Roger, you're going to think I'm making this up. Roger finds out who the purchaser's agent is and goes to the office of the purchasing agent, the person representing the family buying the house, goes in and says, I need you to know this is going to be a fraudulent closing. Yes, the woman who claims to have power of attorney over this old person has manipulated the old person to get power of attorney, and she has no legal right to do this, and I'm not moving out, and you need to be careful. And it's going to ruin this closing that Sandra has worked so hard to get us to the finish line. We're almost there. So, of course, the purchasing agent calls the seller's agent, Alice's agent, and all of a sudden we're about to lose this whole deal. Now, how do you think we responded to all this? What's our response? Well, you can imagine, because you can imagine your response. You know what we did? And this is kind of embarrassing, and I'm not even going to give you the details. It's so embarrassing. We sat around day after day, night after night, coming up with the most devious, manipulative ways you can imagine to get Roger out of the house. I'm telling you, there were times we just listened to each other and think, who are we? Who have we become? We had a pesticide option I won't even go into, no lie. Then I said, you know what? I know some kind of other crazy people. We should just invite some other people to live in the house, live in Alice's house with Roger until he finally gets fed up and moves. There was the turn off the electricity and the water option, which we could have done because, you know, Alice is paying bills for, I mean, there are others I won't even go into. But we realized what was happening. We're starting to become like Roger. We're becoming like him. We don't even like him. It was all we talked about, to the point, honestly. It was as if Roger had moved in with us, because it so focused our attention every single day. How do we get Roger out of the house before this closing? We couldn't even believe somebody would give us a contract, give Alice a contract on the house, because they'd never seen the house empty because there's a guy camping out in one of the bedrooms. Now, in part 2, I'm going to come back and tell you how that story resolved. So, yeah, I know. Okay. Sorry to do that. But the point is simply this, and you know this. It is so difficult. It is so difficult to be good to people who just aren't good, right? No matter what kind of faith you have, in the moment, it is so difficult to be kind to people who just, it seems like in their heart, they're just unkind or sensitive to people who are insensitive. The golden rule, it just doesn't seem to apply. You know the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others. What is it? Do unto you. And this is great until somebody mistreats you. And it's great until somebody mistreats me or mistreats somebody that I love. And for me, in this particular story, it's a double-edged sword, because I loved Alice and I wanted us to help Alice, but I was watching my wife be mistreated at the same time, and I'm supposed to do unto Roger as I would have Roger do unto me. And suddenly the golden rule is out the window. Now it's the iron rule. I just made this up, but you understand the iron rule. It's do unto others as they have done unto you, right? And this doesn't only feel natural. It doesn't only just feel natural to treat people the way they've treated us. In the moment, it just seems right. It just seems fair. And in fact, if I were to go into detail about some of these crazy ideas we had to get Roger out of the house, after hearing just the part of the story I've told you, you would be like, well, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't you do all that? It just seems right. It seems fair. It seems just. It seems even. And then there's this, and maybe this is a little close to home, because maybe this is part of your story, or maybe part of your story growing up, or maybe it's part of the story of your first marriage. When we're mistreated in a relationship and we feel powerless to do anything about it, again, we're off balance, we compensate, but sometimes we compensate not in the relationship with the person that threw us off balance. You've seen this happen. We compensate in another relationship. We compensate somewhere or with somebody else. I'll take it out on you because I can't take it out on him. I can't take it out on her. I can't get back at them. I can't go back into the office and take it out on the people that mistreated me at work. But I've got all this energy, I'm off balance. And then it's do unto others. It's do unto others as someone else has done unto you. So round and round and round it goes. And you know what? We've all been there at some level. Maybe not a big level, but at some level, we've all, been a part of this dynamic. So here's the question. Here's what we're talking about. What do we do? I mean, what do you do about the mean people? Maybe it was your ex. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's a boss, a sister, a sister-in-law. And there's just no way to extricate yourself from the relationship because of the nature of the relationship, but they're just mean. And it's fun, I'll admit it, it's fun to daydream about getting even. But the problem, of course, is, and you know this, is that getting even makes us even. Getting even makes us even with someone that we don't even like. It makes us like someone that we dislike. So what do? You can't ignore them, right? That's impossible. And if you ignore them, you know what they do, right? They just keep chipping away, and eventually we break and we react. And then it's like we've given them even more power over us. So ignoring them isn't the way forward, and getting even isn't the way forward. But fortunately, there's a third option. It's a third option that it's not intuitive. It's a third option that actually decreases their power over us. And honestly, it's the third option that allows us to guard and protect our hearts. And it positions us, when this is said and done, to tell a much better story. Of course, the way forward is taught and modeled by Jesus. But it's also modeled in the Old Testament by a relatively unknown individual whose life intersects with the life of David. Now, many of us, if you grew up around church or in church, are familiar with who King David was. But this event doesn't take place when he's King David or even Shepherd Boy David. This event takes place when he is fugitive David. After David, as a teenager, killed Goliath, you remember that story, he becomes a hero, a national hero in Israel, in ancient Israel. And so King Saul, the king at the time, draws him in close because David's a leader, he's a national hero. You want to keep your friends close, you want to keep your potential rivals even closer. And then King Saul gets word that some rogue prophet has gone to David's home as a little boy and anointed David to be the next king of Israel. Now, this is a real problem if you're already the king, because not only do you want to finish out your years as king, you want your son, in his case, Jonathan, to become the next king. So this is now this is messing with this dynasty. So King Saul tries to kill David. David escapes. He becomes a fugitive. He's living out in the wilderness. He's had to leave his family over time because he's a leader. He attracts other men like him, other angry, mistreated outlaws. Before long, he has his own little miniature army of about 600 men, plus their wives and all their stuff. And they're outcast from society. They have no place to call home. And they're all angry because each of them have their own story of being mistreated and the injustice that had happened under King Saul. So, and David's got all this anger and all this frustration. And of course, like any of us, he's looking for a place to sort of take it out, somebody to take it out on, because King Saul is untouchable. And in this story, he finally finds a victim. And that's where the story picks up. So I'll read part of the story, and then we're going to stop in the middle, pick it up next time. So here's what happens. A certain man, this is in 1 Samuel 25, and Samuel is essentially David's biographer in a sense. A certain man in Moan who had property there in Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats. You know, and you read this in ancient times, it's like, for us, it's like, what would you do with 1,000 goats? Anyway, so he had 1,000 goats. He had garages full of cars. Think of it that way. He had 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel, and his name was Nabal. Now, sheep shearing season in ancient times, this is when wealthy people found out how much wealthier they had just become. This was like, it's like a financial report, an annual financial report. He's about to find out where he is financially, whether or not he turned a profit, and if so, how much. His name's Nabal. Text goes on and says this. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was intelligent and beautiful, but her husband was harsh and mean. There's our word. He was mean in his dealings. In fact, the Hebrew word here actually means heavy. He was a big, heavy. He was just heavy. He was difficult. He was a burden to deal with. He was just a mean person. Story continues. While David and his men were in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he hears, hey, this guy is about to find out how much wealthier he's become. So he sent 10 of his guys. He sent 10 young men and said to them, now look, I want you to go and find where Nabal is in Carmel. And I want you to greet him in my name. Let him know, hey, we're coming in the name of David. And here's what I want you to say to Nabal. Somebody, write this down. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and to your household, and good health to all that is yours. This was a formal ancient greeting that said, hey, I don't know if we've met before, but I've heard good things about you, and let's be friends. And then the message went on like this. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs went missing. David is saying, hey, during the season when the sheep were out on the hills, we were around your shepherds all the time, and we never stole a thing. In fact, we watched over your flocks by night. In other words, Nabal, your profit that you're about to experience is due in part to the fact that we protected your shepherds and your sheep. And not only did we not allow our folks to steal from you, we didn't allow any of the other roving bands of bandits steal from you either. And he says, if you don't believe me, ask your own servants, and they'll tell you. Therefore, would you be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time? And please, give your servants, talking about himself, and your son David, whatever you can find for them or for us. In other words, you're profiting big time. We were sort of part of the profit. So if you have anything left over, or just out of the goodness of your heart, would you share with our men? So when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. And then they waited, which means they probably gave it to one of Nabal's men to give to Nabal, who they hoped would come out and say, oh, absolutely. Now, before we go on with the story, a quick word about David in this season of his life. David, and this is kind of hard for us depending on, how you view David growing up in church or Sunday school. David was a very violent man. He was not to be trifled with. In fact, when as a fugitive he lived in the land of the Philistines as on the run from King Saul, he and his men would regularly raid Philistine villages. In fact, his biographer said that whenever, this is terrible, whenever David attacked an area, he did not leave a man or a woman alive. He didn't want there to be any witnesses. He wanted people to come over the hill and just see the smoke, and there's no one there to explain what happened to this village. He took the sheep and the cattle, donkeys and camels and clothes. He was living off the backs of other people's labor, and he would leave no one alive to tell the story. So he was dangerous even by ancient standards. He was not someone to be trifled with. So back to the story. His 10 guys are waiting. And after, he keeps Nabal, I think, intentionally keeps them waiting. I think that's why the author included that detail. Nabal finally either sends somebody else or answers himself. And here's what he says. Who is this David? You've come in the name of David. Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? So he knew who David was. But he's just dissing David and his whole story and his whole family. Who is the son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. I know David's not serving King Saul anymore, but so what? A lot of people are breaking away from their masters. Your master is a nobody. He's an outlaw. I didn't ask for his help, so I don't owe him anything. Why? Excuse me. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? So no, I'm not going to help you. So David's men, the story goes on, David's men turned back around and went back. And when they arrived, they reported every word. And David said to his men, oh, well, it was worth a try. No. David, the dangerous man, David said to his men, okay, each of you, strap on your sword. Strap on your sword. Strap on your sword. So they did, the text says. And then the text adds this detail. This is so interesting. And David strapped his on as well. In other words, you mess with me and you will see. Now, there's a specific reason, I think, why the author, David's biographer actually highlights David arming himself in addition to the men arming themselves. Because David's sword was like no other sword. David's sword that's mentioned in this text was actually a reminder. It was a reminder to David, it was a visual aid that he did not need to take matters into his own hands. Does anybody know where David got his sword? Anybody? Goliath, that's right. David got his sword from Goliath. So Goliath's sword, imagine this. Goliath's sword is a visual aid of God's protection. When David was just a teenager, when David marched down into the valley of Elah and faced this giant, God protected him. That God was clearly, going to come to David's aid and take care of him. He did not need to return evil for evil. He didn't need to take matters into his own hands. God had chosen David. God had anointed David. David, of all people, could trust that God was going to care for him and the people around him. But David's angry, and David's hurt, and he can't see any of that. So he does what we're all tempted to do. He powers up, and he redirects the frustration he has at King Saul, who is untouchable, toward Nabal. Text says this. So about 400 men went up with David. This was an overreaction of epic proportion. This was going to be a massacre. We've all heard that hurt people hurt people. Well, this is an example of hunted people. They hunt people. And so he sets out. And he sets out doing what we do when we set out in a similar situation. He sets out internally building up a head of steam, building up a case to justify what he's not 100% sure he should be doing. You ever do that? You have those imaginary conversations with the person that is mean to you, and you're gonna get back at them. And in your mind, or I'll say in my mind, when I have an imaginary conversation with someone, there's usually a crowd standing around in my imagination. And I have the final one-liner, and everybody in the crowd's like, oh, and they're completely humiliated. Is it just me? No, we have those imaginary conversations like how we're gonna get even, how we're gonna get back at that person. Hey, Sandra, I got an idea. Actually, this was her idea. Let's go in, it might have been my idea. Let's go in when he's not there and just slit the air mattress, take all of his clothes, his computer, and put it out on the front in the yard and just change the locks. We would be justified, right? Again, that might have been Sandra's idea. I don't know. Anyway, so here's what the text says. This is so interesting because we get in David's head. This is so fascinating. David had just said, so now they're mounted up. He's got 400 warriors. They're making their way down to the valley, to the plain where Nabal is shearing sheep. David had just said, it's been useless. It's been useless. It's been a waste of my time and effort watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. I mean, we did him such a huge favor. And how has he responded? He has paid me back evil for good. Then he invites God into the equation. May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave one male of all who belong to him alive. In other words, I'm gonna murder him, I'm gonna kill his male servants, and I'm gonna kill his sons. That'll teach him to treat me this way. So we're gonna pause the story there, but here's what we have so far. We got two characters, we have two responses, and we have no hero, right? I mean, we have Nabal, we have David, evil for good. David did good, he responded with evil. David, who's about to do evil for evil. Nabal is somewhat maniacal, and David is about to be predictable. I mean, who could blame him for what he's about to do? And sometimes, again, it just seems like evil for evil is the only option. Turns out, as I said earlier, it's not. There's a third option. We're going to talk about that in part 2. But here's what I want you to do between now and part 2. I want to give you 4 questions to think about. And again, I would prefer you not to think about these through the filter of other people, but just through what's going on right now in your life with the people that are difficult to deal with. You may not consider them mean people. It may not be an extreme, or it may be very extreme. But I want you to process these questions through the filter of what's going on right now in your life. And parents, I can't overstate the importance of this. Parents, I think you need to teach these 4 questions to your children, because your children have, or will face some very mean people. And their natural reaction, like our natural reaction, will be evil for evil, or to allow that person to continue to control them. And as a parent, this is so difficult to watch. And sometimes as a parent, it's tempting to coach our kids to power up, to return evil for evil, because we will feel better, right? See, these are 4 questions for us. These are 4 questions for our kids. Question number 1 is this. Do you want to be even with someone you don't even like? No, I already know the answer to this question. No, we don't. But our natural response to mean people oftentimes is an attempt to get even with people we don't even like, to be like someone that we would readily admit that we dislike. And again, we think somehow once we get even, that ends it, but that doesn't end it, right? That doesn't end the cycle. It actually perpetuates it. Recently, I heard Jamie Dickens say, it's not evil for evil. It just becomes evil for evil, for evil for evil, for evil for evil, for evil. It just goes on and on and on. So do you want to be part, or do I want to be part of perpetuating that cycle? The question number 2, wouldn't you rather be ahead? I mean, do you want to get even with someone you don't even like, or wouldn't you rather be ahead? Wouldn't you prefer to be unlike the person or the people that you dislike? And this is so, I said earlier, this is so not intuitive. But here's the thing, and when I say it, you know it's true. Unlike any other arena of life, you actually relationally pull ahead by refusing to get even. You actually pull ahead by refusing to get even. And that leads to a third question that we ask a lot around here within several different contexts. It's simply this. In fact, this is third question. Don't miss next time, because this third question is a question that the character that we will introduce next time actually baits David into asking about his own future. And the third question is this: when this is nothing more than a story you tell, what story do you want to tell? When your response to this current relationship is nothing more than a story you tell, what story do you want to tell? Do you want to tell the story that I ended up just like the person that I disliked because I allowed them to infuriate me into acting just like them? It's not a good story. It's not the story that any of us want to tell. And then the fourth question is the on-ramp to the solution. The fourth question is the on-ramp to pulling ahead. And the fourth question sets us up and puts us in this uncomfortable space that we know we probably should step into. And if you're a Jesus follower, if you're a Christian, you know with certainty you've been called to step into. But it's so uncomfortable. The fourth question is this: what would it look like? And you don't have to commit to this. You just have to have an internal conversation. What would it look like to return good for evil? Not just refuse to react or to react in like kind, but to be kind. Not just refuse to be bad, but to take seriously the words of Jesus, because he was so direct about this. I mean, a lot of things Jesus said we have a hard time figuring out. This is too clear. He said, I want you to do good to those who mistreat you. Don't just put up with them. Don't just forgive them. Don't just ignore them. Don't just try not to be like them. Jesus says, nope, that's not enough. I want you to think through how to do good to those who mistreat you. Because Jesus knew that doing good to people who have not been good to us is ultimately what frees us, what protects our heart. Getting even is natural. It's predictable. Jesus has invited us to be unpredictable. Jesus has invited us to do something extraordinary. It's as if he's saying, don't be predictable. Don't write a predictable story. Write a remarkable story. Write that story that's worth telling. And what will determine whether or not that story is worth telling is not what the other person does, because you have no control over that. It is 100% right here in our decision whether or not to respond either in like kind or to be kind, to do good for those who have mistreated us. Remarkable begins with an honest answer to this question. What would it look like? What would it look like to return good for evil? What would it look like to do good to the person who has mistreated you? Because you don't pull ahead by attempting to get even. And we will pick it up right there next time in part 2 of Mean People. I'd love to pray for us before we go. Heavenly Father, it is so easy to stand up here and talk about it. It is so difficult to walk out the doors, or to show up at work, or to go next door, or in some cases even go home and do this. So would you please give each of us eyes to see our circumstances the way that you see our circumstances? And would you give us ears, Father, to hear your whisper when we ask that question, honestly, that many of us are afraid to ask: what would it look like to do good for the person who has not done good to me? Give us eyes to see, give us ears to hear, and then give us the courage to step into that scary, scary place. And in doing so, we know, because you promised us this, in doing so, we become like our Father in heaven. So give us the courage to take that step. In Jesus' name, amen.
What an interesting thought. Do we really want to get even with people we really don't even like? Or do we want to pull ahead? Something to think about as we go into this week And I hope that you'll ponder it and come back next Sunday. Plus, we all have to come back next Sunday because what happened to Roger? We got to figure that out. So plan to come back next Sunday. And as you look ahead, I'd love for you to save the date for August 8th. Sunday, August 8th. It'll be a don't miss Sunday. So go ahead and get that on your calendar already. And for those of you who are our guests today, I hope that you'll swing by the studio quickly as you leave and grab that gift that we've got for you, something I think you'll enjoy using during the course of this week. And if you're newer to Lake Oconee Church, I'd love for you to stay right where you are because we'll host next right here in this room. We'll continue watching your kids. You'll be out right about noon, and I would love the chance to meet you. But for all the rest of us, we'll see you next Sunday. I hope you have a wonderful week.
Sometimes I just can't take it. Sometimes I just can't take it, and it isn't alright. I'm not gonna make it, and I think my shoes untied. I'm like a broken record. I'm like a broken record, and I'm not playing right. Just cynical, how about you kill me till you tell me on the heavenly phone to hold tight. Come on, come on. Oh, 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 come on, come on. Don't let go. Hold tight, hold tight. Oh, it's alright, you said. I got my hands up, shaking just to let you know that you've got a higher power. Got me singing every second, dancing every hour. Oh yeah, you've got a higher power, and she really someone I wanna know. This boy is electric. This boy is electric, and you're sparkling like the universe connected. And I'm buzzing night after night after night. This joy is electric. This joy is electric, and you're circuiting through. I'm so happy.